So, apparently what started with me trying to improve my portrait painting skills has now become a full-on obsession with the Tudor dynasty. And honestly, I'm loving it. Last time I painted Elizabeth of York, England's first Tudor queen, the woman who united the red rose and the white rose, and quite possibly the only emotionally stable person in this entire family. Before that, we looked at Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor dynasty, the financial warrior, and the man who spent his entire reign looking like someone had just mentioned rebellion near him. But now, the time has come. Henry VIII, the main event, the bigwig of Tudor history. Hey, here I am. My name's Nathan, and if you're into watercolour portraits, history, and the Tudors, you're in the right place. This week, while I paint Henry VIII, we're going to look at the Tudor king who changed England forever. A man remembered for 6 wives, enormous portraits, absolute confidence, and making almost every situation dramatically worse. And honestly, the strange thing about Henry VIII is that he didn't start out as the villain of the story. At all. Henry VIII was born on the 28th of June 1491, and originally, he was not supposed to be king. That job belonged to his older brother, Arthur Tudor. Arthur was the heir. Arthur got the royal education. Arthur married Catherine of Aragon first. Henry was basically the spare child, which in royal families means important, but not that important. And because he wasn't expected to rule, Henry actually had a much more relaxed upbringing. He studied languages, music, theology, sport, and honestly, young Henry VIII was kind of annoyingly talented. He was athletic, intelligent, charismatic, handsome, and apparently very charming, which all seems quite unfair to have all of those good qualities in one person. He was also deeply religious, which became kind of ironic later. Now, in the last video of this series, we talked about how close Henry was to his mother, Elizabeth of York, and when she died in 1503, Henry was only 11 years old. After that, his father, Henry VII, became colder and much more controlling. Young Henry spent years basically trapped under his father's strict supervision, so when Henry VII finally dies in 1509, young Henry VIII suddenly becomes king at 17 years old. And England absolutely loves him. He was the biggest celebrity of the day, and people saw him as the perfect Renaissance prince. Tall, athletic, educated, confident, and unlike his father, who worried constantly about money and rebellion, Henry VIII seemed exciting. He loved tournaments, music, dancing, hunting. This man genuinely wrote songs, including Greensleeves, probably, possibly, maybe. Historians argue about it all the time, but I choose to believe it because I think it's funny. Now that he's king, one of the first things that Henry does is marry Catherine of Aragon, who awkwardly had previously been married to his dead brother Arthur, which sounds like the beginning of a Tudor problem. Because it absolutely was. At first, their marriage actually seemed very happy. Henry adored Catherine. They were genuinely close for years. And early on, Henry wasn't the cruel tyrant that people imagine. He was generous, popular, energetic. But there was one huge issue hanging over everything. Henry desperately needed a male heir. Because Tudor history was still unstable, the dynasty was new, civil war was recent, and Henry had grown up hearing stories about rival claims and chaos. To him, having a son wasn't just a personal vanity, it was survival. And this is the important thing with Henry VIII. Most of the time, he genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. That's what makes him interesting and terrifying. Now, Catherine of Aragon did become pregnant several times, but tragically most of the children died young. The only surviving child was Mary, who would later become Mary I. And Henry becomes increasingly obsessed with the idea that God is punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. Which sounds convenient because around this exact time, he also becomes obsessed with Anne Boleyn. Now Anne Boleyn, along with all of the other wives, is going to get her own video, because honestly there is far too much drama to fit into this one. But Anne changes everything, because Henry doesn't just want to marry her, he wants to rebuild England's entire religious system for her. Now that's what I call commitment. Unhinged, but commitment. So Henry asks the Pope to annul his marriage to Catherine, and the Pope says no. Henry says, right then, I'll make my own church, which is genuinely one of the boldest overreactions in history. And that leads to the English Reformation. Henry breaks from the Catholic Church, creates the Church of England, and places himself at the head of it. Now, officially, this was all about religion and royal authority. Unofficially, Henry really wanted a divorce. And from Henry's perspective, this all made sense. He believed that kings answered directly to God, so if the Pope stood in his way, well, clearly the Pope was the problem. Simple. Now, this is the point when Henry's reputation starts becoming complicated. Because early Henry VIII and later Henry VIII feel like two completely different people. And honestly, physically, they almost were. When he was young, Henry was athletic and healthy, but later in life, things changed dramatically. He suffers a leg injury during a jousting accident. The wound never properly heals, and he's in constant pain. He becomes less active, his health deteriorates, his temper worsens, and historians debate how much of this actually affected his personality. Because later, Henry becomes deeply suspicious, paranoid, impulsive, and increasingly ruthless. Not exactly ideal qualities in someone who can order executions willy-nilly. Now, obviously we can't talk about Henry VIII without mentioning all of the wives. There were 6 of them, which honestly sounds exhausting administratively. But the important thing is that each marriage reflects something that Henry wanted at that point in his life. Catherine of Aragon represented stability and legitimacy. Anne Boleyn represented passion and obsession and the hope for a son. Jane Seymour finally gave him the male heir that he desperately wanted, the future Edward VI. But she tragically died shortly afterwards. And honestly, I think Jane probably became Henry's favourite, partly because she died before the relationship could go sour. Then there's Anne of Cleves, which turns into the world's most awkward blind date, Catherine Howard, which becomes a complete disaster, and Catherine Parr, who somehow manages to survive the entire experience. By wife number 6, everybody must have been emotionally exhausted, including the portrait painters. And now me. And then there are the children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. 3 future monarchs, which is ridiculous. 1 king producing 3 future rulers? That feels greedy historically. And despite everything Henry puts these children through politically, they each inherited parts of him. Mary inherited his stubbornness. Elizabeth inherited his intelligence and charisma. Edward inherited the Protestant future Henry created, whether intentionally or not. Looking at this painting of Henry, it's fascinating how carefully constructed this image is. Everything in this portrait is designed to intimidate. The broad stance, the jewels, the fur, the size of the sleeves. Honestly, those sleeves. Do you think he's overcompensating for something? And unlike the softer portrait of his mother, Elizabeth of York, Henry's portrait is all about power. He's staring directly at you. He's completely confident, completely certain. It's less, here is the king, and more, I am the king. And it worked. Even now, centuries later, Henry VIII is probably the first Tudor people think of. Probably the first king people think of. This image still dominates history. Henry VIII dies in 1547 at the age of 55. By the end of his life, he's vastly different from the young golden prince people adored in 1509. But he completely transformed England, religiously, politically, culturally, And whether people see him as a tyrant, a reformer, a narcissist, or just a catastrophic disaster, he remains one of the most fascinating monarchs in British history. Mostly because every decision he made feels simultaneously understandable and absolutely ridiculous. Which is honestly peak Tudor. Next time we're going to move on to Catherine of Aragon, the first wife. And genuinely, one of the most formidable women in Tudor history. Because while Henry VIII spent years trying to get rid of her, Catherine absolutely refuses to go quietly. Good for her. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more painting, portraits, and Tudor scandals. And let me know in the comment which Tudor portrait has been your favourite so far. Although, I suspect it's probably going to be Henry VIII. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!